Today it became known about an event that is already being called one of the most high-profile episodes of the past month. Russian troops launched a precise and devastating strike on an enemy position, as a result of which a C-300 anti-aircraft missile system was destroyed. This moment can be compared to ripping a strong shield out of the enemy's arsenal, because such complexes provide cover for strategic facilities and groups of troops on the far approaches. The strike on it became not just a local victory, but part of a well-thought-out operation in which intelligence, technology, and verified calculation came together. We will tell you how it all happened, what is behind the strike, and why it can change the balance of power on the battlefield. Subscribe so you don't miss the continuation of this story. The C-300 is a long-range mobile air defense missile system designed to repel massive air and ballistic missile attacks. Its long-range missiles can hit targets at a distance of over 200 kilometers, and radar stations detect the approach of the enemy long before he enters the target zone. For Ukraine, the presence of at least one such complex means the ability to cover key cities, infrastructure, and command centers from airstrikes. The loss of this weapon is a blow not only to military power but also to morale, because it is extremely difficult to restore such a complex in the current war. The Russian operation to destroy the C-300 began with reconnaissance. According to sources, unmanned aerial vehicles were deployed to the area where the complex was located, which for several days recorded the movements and the mode of operation of radars. At the same time, radio reconnaissance was conducted and control signals were intercepted to determine exactly when the equipment would be vulnerable. The culmination was the use of Geran-2 drones, simple at first glance, but extremely effective devices. These drones, launched from different directions, forced the complex to activate its radars, thus marking its position for more powerful means of defeat. When the exact coordinates were obtained, a missile strike was launched into the area. According to reports from the scene, several missiles reached the target, causing a detonation of the ammunition. The explosion was so strong that individual fragments of the complex were scattered dozens of meters. Satellite images, which have already circulated on specialized channels, clearly show the scorched spot and the debris left by the once formidable weapon. For the Ukrainian side, this is not just a loss of equipment. It is a demonstration that even the most secure systems do not guarantee inviolability in modern warfare. Sources in military circles note that the operation was carried out in conjunction with different branches of the armed forces, from drone operators and radio reconnaissance specialists to artillerymen and calculations of operational tactical complexes. Such a coordinated strike shows that Russia is increasing its ability to comprehensively suppress the enemy's air defense systems. It is especially symbolic that Geran-2 were again involved in the operation. Despite their relatively low cost and simple design, these drones have become a real nightmare for Ukrainian calculations, forcing them to either expend expensive missiles or risk being hit by a missile strike. But hitting the C-300 is not just a military success, it is also a political signal. It shows that Russia is capable of getting its hands on even the most long-range and rare complexes, which the West supplies to Kyiv or which Ukraine carefully keeps in reserve. In such a situation, Kyiv's partners will be forced to find new ways to cover their equipment, which means new supplies, new expenditures, and a new round of escalation. And for the Russian side, this is an occasion to emphasize that the strategic goals of suppressing the enemy's air defense are being implemented consistently and methodically. The situation around the destruction of the C-300 has already caused a resonance in the international media. Some of them call this event a turning point in the current campaign, while others see it as just another episode of the protracted confrontation. But one thing is clear: the front line after such strikes changes not only on maps, but also in the minds of military commanders. The loss of such a powerful complex leaves holes in the defense, which can be used to advance ground forces and conduct new operations deep inside the enemy's territory. After the destruction of the C-300 complex, the Ukrainian commanders faced an unpleasant choice. On the one hand, recognizing the loss of such a system hurts its reputation. On the other hand, it is almost impossible to hide the fact, given that video and photos from the site of the strike have already appeared in open sources. Nevertheless, officials in Kyiv have chosen a cautious tactic, avoiding direct comments and shifting public attention to other events. However, military analysts who have studied the footage have no doubt that it is the C-300 and in its entirety with launchers, radars, and command center. According to experts, the restoration of such a complex in the current conditions is unrealistic. Even if it is possible to obtain similar systems from the Allies, their transfer and commissioning will take weeks, if not months. During this time, a gap will form in Ukraine's air defenses, which Russia apparently intends to exploit. The very next day after the strike, Russian drones and missiles launched several massive attacks on targets deep inside Ukrainian territory, testing the response of the remaining air defenses. As observers have noted, the number of interceptions decreased, and some areas were left without any cover at all. The tactics that the Russian military has been practicing for the past few months have once again manifested themselves in this operation. The Geran-2 drones have become a key element. They not only distract air defense units, but also act as reconnaissance drones. These vehicles, built on the pattern of barrage munitions, can stay in the air for hours, waiting for the command to strike. Their engine emits a characteristic sound nicknamed moped at the front, and often the psychological pressure from their approach is no less than from the hits themselves. The Ukrainian military has to spend expensive anti-aircraft missiles on them, which could be useful for intercepting cruise or ballistic targets. It is also important that Geran-2 are produced in significant quantities, which allows Russia to saturate the front line with them, creating a constant threat to the enemy. One such drone costs dozens of times less than a missile of the C-300 complex, but is capable of disabling it if it hits a radar or launcher. And it is this cost-benefit ratio that makes them a weapon of asymmetric warfare, against which Ukraine does not yet have an effective response. The international reaction to the strike on the C-300 also showed the depth of the split in assessments of what is happening. Representatives of some Western countries said that such losses will not affect Ukraine's combat capability as a whole, but unofficial sources recognize that each loss of rare equipment increases pressure on allies, forcing them to seek new supplies. At the same time, resources are not infinite, and the production of modern air defense systems takes years. In this connection, there are fears that Kyiv may be left with a fragmented defense, where some areas will be covered with modern systems and others with outdated systems that are ineffective against modern means of attack. The expert community is already discussing that this strike could be a prologue to a large-scale operation to suppress Ukraine's entire air defense system. If the Russian troops consistently disable such systems, it will be possible to use aviation more freely and strike objects that were previously out of reach. This could lead to a chain reaction, a drop in the effectiveness of defense, an increase in casualties, and ultimately a change in the course of hostilities in certain areas. Inside Ukraine, the destruction of the C-300 has caused sharp discontent among military bloggers and some politicians, who openly criticize the command for the lack of secrecy and protection of such systems. Some accuse the leadership of placing the complex too close to the front line, making it vulnerable. Others point out that the transfer of such valuable equipment should have been accompanied by electronic suppression and camouflage measures, which was not done. The Russian side, on the contrary, is using this episode in its information campaign, emphasizing the accuracy and effectiveness of its strikes. Russian Defense Ministry briefings provide data on the number of destroyed equipment, and footage of targets being hit is being disseminated through official channels and social media. This not only builds confidence in its forces, but also sends a signal to Ukraine's allies that the billions invested could be burned up in a matter of minutes. The strike on the C-300 was also a reminder that in this war it is not only the quantity of equipment that matters, but also the ability to use it. Even the most advanced system becomes useless if the enemy has managed to discover its location and select effective means of defeat. And this is where Geran-2 played a key role. They did not just attack, they forced the complex to reveal itself, which sealed its fate. The history of the C-300 complex goes back to the Soviet period, when the issue of protecting troops and strategic facilities from a wide range of threats became acute. In contrast to conventional air defense systems primarily focused on intercepting aircraft and cruise missiles, the C-300 was created as a universal shield capable of fighting both aerodynamic and ballistic targets. Its development was carried out under the conditions of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union was preparing to repel massive strikes of a probable enemy. It was this multifunctionality that made the complex especially valuable and rare even in the arsenal of large armies. After the collapse of the USSR, only a few states inherited such systems. Ukraine inherited a limited number of C-300s, and their technical condition required constant maintenance and modernization. In a protracted conflict, each surviving installation was literally a golden asset. Western supplies could compensate for the loss of some air defense systems, but Kyiv did not receive full-fledged analogs of the C-300. Moreover, any attempt to move such large equipment through the country was fraught with risks, both in terms of detection and possible strike. Against this background, the destruction of one such complex looks not just a tactical success, but a strategic achievement for Russia. Military experts point out that such strikes cause double damage. First, they reduce the real defense potential of the enemy. Second, they affect the psychological state of both the military and the civilian population. When it becomes clear that even powerful and rare systems are not protected, confidence in the ability to deter attacks drops. The geopolitical context of this story only reinforces its significance. Russia has been ramping up the intensity of strikes deep inside Ukrainian territory over the past months, testing the reaction of its Western allies. Each successful defeat of an important target raises questions about how effective the West's strategy of pumping weapons into Ukraine is. If supplies are destroyed as quickly as they arrive, there is a reasonable question about their feasibility. This has already been the subject of private discussions in European capitals more than once. In parallel, Moscow is intensifying its interaction with a number of states ready to supply components and technologies for the mass production of drones like Geran-2. These drones have become a symbol of a new war, a war in which relatively inexpensive and easy-to-manufacture devices are able to disable equipment that takes many times more resources to build and maintain. In fact, it is a demonstration that in a modern conflict, asymmetric solutions can offset the advantages of high-tech systems. Western think tanks are already making alarming predictions. If Ukraine loses one or two high-level air defense systems per month, its ability to cover major cities and strategic facilities could be critically reduced. This would open up new operational options for Russia, from massive airstrikes to deeper ground operations. The most vulnerable will be industrial hubs, transportation hubs, and energy facilities, which are extremely difficult to restore under war conditions. Ukrainian officials try to emphasize that each loss will be compensated by new supplies from allies. In reality, however, the process is much more complicated. Even if the US or European countries agree to provide additional systems, their production, transportation, and training take time. In the case of C-300 level systems, which are simply not available in the West, filling the gap is unlikely to be possible in the foreseeable future. On the diplomatic front, the situation is also developing tensely. Russia is using the destruction of the complex as an argument in negotiations and in the information struggle, demonstrating its ability to launch pinpoint strikes against key targets. This not only strengthens its position in the eyes of its own allies, but also puts pressure on those countries that have so far taken a wait-and-see attitude. For some states, especially in Asia and Africa, such episodes signal that Western military aid does not guarantee immunity. In this complex mix of political and military factors, every week could be decisive. On the one hand, Ukraine is trying to strengthen its air defense by reallocating its remaining resources and using mobile teams to cover the most vulnerable areas. On the other hand, Russia continues to methodically seek out and destroy such targets, creating conditions for a possible shift in the balance of power. After the destruction of the C-300, there was a silence on the front line and in the headquarters of Kyiv's allies that speaks louder than any statements. For the Ukrainian command, the loss of such a system is not just a tactical failure, but a signal that even a deeply echeloned defense does not guarantee security. Russia has demonstrated that it is capable of tracking and defeating even the rarest and most protected complexes, and this lesson will be taken into account in the future plans of both sides. Analysts have already identified several likely scenarios for the development of the situation. The first and most obvious one is that Russia will continue hunting for key elements of Ukrainian air defense, concentrating on long-range complexes. The destruction of even one such facility opens a loophole in the sky that can be used to launch massive drone and missile strikes against critical infrastructure. That said, the mass use of drones like Geran-2 has already proven effective against expensive equipment. Each new successful attack reinforces this strategy. The second scenario assumes that Kyiv will accelerate the process of obtaining new air defense assets from the West. However, with many countries themselves concerned about their own defense, it will be difficult to allocate additional complexes. The delivery of modern weapons requires not only time but also political will, and in some capitals there is already growing dissatisfaction with the scale of support for Ukraine. Internal crises and approaching elections may lead to a decrease in aid, making each loss even more painful for Kyiv. The third scenario is a possible change in the nature of hostilities. If Ukraine's air defenses weaken, Russia will be able to use aviation more actively and strike targets that were previously out of reach. This could lead to new waves of civilian evacuations and humanitarian crises, especially in major cities and industrial areas. The international community will be faced with the dilemma of either intervening more actively or watching the balance of power gradually tilt in Moscow's favor. Against the backdrop of these predictions, the diplomatic environment will become increasingly tense. Russia will use successes on the front as an argument in negotiations, convincing allies and partners of the effectiveness of its military strategy. Kyiv, in turn, will try to intensify its information campaign to prove that without large-scale support from the West, the situation could spiral out of control. Under such conditions, any mistake, any delay in deliveries or negotiations can change the course of the conflict. But behind the figures and reports are real lives. For residents of frontline areas, every loss of an air defense system means an increased risk of being hit. For military calculations, it is a reminder that there are no truly safe zones in this war. And as long as Geran-2 continues to circle the air and intelligence centers continue to search for the next target, tensions will only increase. We will keep a close eye on the situation and tell you everything we know, unvarnished but with maximum detail. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new releases. Ahead, apparently, we are waiting for the continuation of this sharp story, and each of its new links will be more important than the previous one.